Welcome to Everything All Right, the literary talk. My guest today is one of Britain's foremost biographers, the elegant Anne Sebba. Her latest book about Ethel Rosenberg is out in paperback now, and Anne joins us from Greece and the beautiful island of Crete. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be talking to you.
And we managed to get together despite some time differences here. So please, Anne, tell us about the story of Ethel Rosenberg in a nutshell, if that's possible.
I will try. Ethel was electrocuted 70 years ago in 1953, and she was accused of conspiracy to commit espionage. There was, in fact, no evidence against Ethel, but her husband, Julius, was a spy, and so they thought that by accusing her or charging her with this very serious conspiracy to commit espionage, that it would act as a lever, that it would put pressure on Julius to talk, because they had secret information that revealed he had been spying. Now, Ethel knew that her husband was a spy, and she approved of, in broad terms, what her husband was doing, helping the Russians when they were allies during the war. But that is not a crime. So what happened is they had to find overt evidence to make Ethel appear guilty. And what they did was they got her brother, David Greenglass, to tell a lie, to perjure himself and say he had seen his sister do some typing, which then was sent to the Russians. And so her brother only served 9 years. Her brother's wife was never indicted, Ruth Greenglass, and they had been spies. But instead, David sent his sister to the electric chair. And when he came out of prison, he had no remorse whatever, because, as the Deputy American Attorney General commented, she called our bluff. They never get named names. They never admitted any guilt, because as far as Ethel was concerned, there was nothing to admit. So she was a mother of 37 with 2 boys who were orphaned. She was the only American woman killed for a crime other than murder. And I think if my book is about one thing, it's about the importance of the rule of law. And the Americans were prepared at that time of hysteria. It was McCarthyite hysteria against the communists. They were prepared to sacrifice one of their own citizens, a woman and a mother, even though they knew there was no evidence against her, because such was the real deep fear of communism.
So what inspired you to write this book now?
What inspired me was that I'd lived in America, I'd lived in New York, and I knew about this story. I lived there in the 1980s, and I had 2 babies, a son and a daughter, and I read the Book of Daniel by E.L. Doctorow, and I knew there was something wrong about this story. I didn't know it in detail, but the more I looked, I was really inspired, because I love America. My daughter was born there. She was an American citizen. And I thought, how on earth in this country that I love, this great democracy, could they allow the rule of law to be subverted? And that was what really sort of reeled me in. In the 70 years since Ethel's death, there's been numerous plays and books and paintings. Ethel's become an icon in America, and yet nobody had written a book about Ethel alone. If you talk to people who know anything about this story, maybe they know Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar, that wonderful novel which starts with the opening line, "It was a queer, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs." People know about her death. They didn't know about her life. I wanted to restore Ethel's humanity, to give her back her voice, which was so cruelly removed from her. And I discovered a woman who really imbibed the American dream. She was clever. It was a time of great misogyny. They were frightened of women who were too clever by half, and Ethel was certainly clever, but she couldn't save herself. She knew she was going to die And she wrote these extraordinary prison letters to her sons, trying to help them live after her death. I just felt it was really a story worth telling. And it certainly has proved a story worth telling, giving Ethel back her voice, taking her away from this phrase, oh, the Rosenbergs, those spies. She wasn't absolutely tied up to her husband. She was an individual person. You know, any one of us who are in a relationship, whether you're married, whether you're a partner, whatever, you still remain an individual person. But Ethel has been enveloped, wrapped up, bound up in the fact that the husband who she loved was a spy. She was trying to do her best as a mother. And that's how I think she should be remembered.
So you've told many stories already that are worth telling. How did you get into writing?
Well, I always wanted to be a journalist. I can remember my parents bought me a toy typewriter when I was 8. I'm sure it's the same story as you have to tell. This sort of burning urge to tell the news, actually. I mean, I only write non-fiction books. I haven't ventured into fiction, unlike you. I need the dialogue created for me. So I stick to the facts, but I don't think you need to look further than the news, which is so extraordinary every day. So from the age of 8, I was writing this chronicle of world news that I typed on my little plastic toy typewriter. And then at 20, I was lucky enough to join Reuters. It was the 1970s. They knew they had to take women. So I was the first woman on the graduate trainee scheme for Reuters. And then my claim to fame, I was the first woman that they sacked because I was pregnant. So, you know, I've always been aware that it's different for women. So I certainly told all the news stories when I worked for Reuters. I was sent to Rome. You know, I joined them speaking French, German, and Russian, but they thought those were all too difficult for a woman. So they sent me to Rome. They thought it was easier in Rome. And I had a wonderful time in Rome, and then I came back to London. And when they suggested that actually I should leave because I couldn't be a mother and a foreign correspondent, I now see they did me a favor because I started writing books and biographies, and I've written about 12 biographies, all about women, but women who have been in the shadows until now, you know, mothers, sisters, wives, who may have had a fantastic, who may have basked in the vicarious glory of their husbands or whatever. But actually, I've tried to bring out of the shadows and tell their own stories. So,
Very zeitgeist.
You know, well, it is, isn't it? It's time to look at these women.
And how did you then get serious? Did you start out with an agent, or did you have a publisher right away? What could you tell a nascent novelist?
Well, I wrote my first book about antique needlework that women had done. It was a book about samplers. How did I start? That was not agented. And then for my first serious book, which was about the novelist Enid Bagnold, who wrote National Velvet, and then I was taken on by an agent at that point. And I suppose my most successful book was Wallis Simpson, which I called That Woman. And I discovered the letters that she'd written, and nobody knew that story. And so that was bought by a television channel. Most of my books have been documentaries for Channel 4. They do a lot of biographies as documentaries. So Jenny Churchill, who was Winston Churchill's mother, Mother Teresa, who I just thought needed a different aspect, although that was a very difficult book because I certainly didn't want to tear into Mother Teresa, but I just thought there was room for a sort of documentary book about her, and then it became a television documentary as well. And so I've only changed agents once. That's very painful. It's like having a divorce. And I'm lucky enough to have had the same agent for the last 20 years, and more or less the same publishers, actually, Weidenfeld. So,
That is
you know,
fantastic.
there's a well, I did wander at one point away from them when they were changing their direction, but I've come back. So luck plays a role. And I think that the zeitgeist, as you say, for telling women's stories has definitely been in my favor.
Yeah. Your biographies read like novels. Do you plot and plan them?
Yes, of course. I mean, even though I made a big point to you at the beginning that I can't make up the dialogue and I can only do nonfiction, that's absolutely true. But I'd be lying if I said that, part of it is, of course, the selection of material. And you can't write an encyclopedia of 12,000 pages. If somebody's lived a long life, of course you select, and that's subjective. So I do understand that every biography reflects the biographer, and maybe it reflects the age you are when you write it. When I wrote about Enid Bagnold, I was a young mother, so I was interested in her attitude to being a young mother, and that was also very important, I think. As you get older, you look at a different phase of their lives, but you must structure it because it has to be readable. There's no point in writing a book that's indigestible or that's an encyclopedia. So all of that matters, but I don't make up anything. And anything I write, I have nasty little footnotes at the back. I don't like them littering the pages, but I think people who want to do more research need to know where to go to find more detail.
So what did you find hardest in your research about Ethel Rosenberg, and what did you find hardest to write?
Well, I suppose it's partly this is such a big story in America. I was really worried about misunderstanding the American legal system, that I might get letters from angry American lawyers saying, how dare I, as an English woman, meddle in their system? And that's been the reverse. Actually, I've had lovely letters from American lawyers who say it's about time we recognized this terrible miscarriage of justice. And there have been a few sessions where we've rerun the case. Actually, I say we, I mean, American lawyers have, and I've just been on a panel discussing Ethel. But also, every book, it's the responsibility that you owe to the person you're writing about. I mean, Jenny Churchill, Wallis Simpson, women in wartime Paris, or Ethel, none of these people have invited me to write the book. I don't think you therefore have to bend over backwards to be over kind, but you owe a duty of care. You owe a responsibility. And there are always relatives alive. I guess in Wallis Simpson's case, she didn't have children, but Ethel had two sons who are now in their late 70s. I did not want to write an authorized book. I felt it was really important that I had the freedom to say what I needed to say. But they are alive, and you don't want to get things wrong when people's lives are at stake. Luckily, they approved of the book because I needed to clear copyright at the end, but I didn't let them see it until I'd finished. So
are there other biographies who inspire your writing?
Other people, you mean, other biographers?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Claire Tomlin is peerless. Claire Tomlin has written, for example, the story of Nellie Ternan, who was Charles Dickens's secret mistress until she wrote about her. And when you understand that, I adore Charles Dickens. I grew up on all those Dickens books from my family. But when you realize that actually there was a woman behind the scenes, the secret mistresses are terribly important. So I think that really does matter. There are lots of women who have written biographies of other women, and I think it's not before time that we look at these stories.
Absolutely. So now you're in Crete. Tell us about your writing day.
Well, it's a very sunny and hot place, and that makes it quite difficult. But I'm in an air-conditioned room, which you can probably see at the moment. So I do write here. I find it very peaceful. You're uninterrupted. I learnt when I wrote about Enid Bagnold that you have to go into your writing room and have a discipline from 9 o'clock in the morning, whether or not you've got anything to write. And I think that's much easier now because we can all do blogs and, you know, the dreaded social media. So you can come and lock yourself away, whether you're actually writing or not. But it's, you know, it is a good place to write, and I find it peaceful and inspiring, and you can't see it, but I actually have a wonderful view, and I start the day by swimming, and that's good for me. And then I come and sit in my room, and I do lots of reading here. I mean, every writer has to do an awful lot of reading, and I don't just mean for book reviews, but to see what other people are doing.
So is that your top tip for an assistant novelist? Start at 9, do lots of reading, stay away from social media.
No, I think my top tip is just come into your room and force yourself. I mean, when I'm in writing mode, I do 1,000 words a day. I'm not nearly in writing mode at the moment. I'm reading and researching and other people's books and novels. I read a lot of novels because, you know, they inspire you as well. I'm reading the wonderful Whalebone Theatre at the moment, which I can't believe is a debut novel by Joanna Quinn. But I haven't got to the wartime section yet. But she told me that my book, Les Parisiennes, about women in wartime France, helped her write the sections on her heroine being in SOE. So we all feed off each other, and I think that's terribly important. I'm sure for your work, you have to do an awful lot of reading, and then you have to let it go. You know, I keep saying, although I'm getting a bit old, but I keep saying one day I'll write a novel, and I don't quite know what it'll be because I'm happily ensconced in writing about women in the 20th century. I think 20th century women are not adequately recognized. And while I don't believe in the mantra that only women can write about women, that's what's happened to me. So, you know, I feel very privileged that there are all these stories lurking there. So I read novels and I read biographies. I have 2 books on the go at the same time always, and I listen to Audible. I just cram as much in as I can.
So what is next for you?
Well, I always swore after Ethel Rosenberg there would be nothing else. And the world scenario made me feel that actually I think we have to look at serious issues of history. So I don't know yet, but I've got something that's cooking. Watch this space. And it'll be about women in wartime and how war tests people. I think the century we've just lived through, the 20th century, was in some ways the most terrible, ghastly century. 2 world wars, and then the Cold War that lasted until 1990, and women not given parity in so many ways. And that's, I think, what my books reflect, how women have discovered themselves, ordinary women in so many ways, who have fought against the grain and lived through extraordinary times, whether they were in concentration camps, whether they were fighting as spies or agents, or whether they were just trying to do the best for their families. So,
well,
I think
we're certainly going to look forward. We're certainly going to look forward to that. So we're already coming to the 5 faves, Anne. So if I can ask you very quickly, without thinking, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, were you going to ask me my favorite movie? Well, I think it has to be Casablanca, because there's a woman, you know, in wartime against the odds.
And what is your favorite
I've watched
book?
it.
And what is your favorite
My
book?
favorite
Book?
oh gosh, my favorite book, I would say again, oh gosh, my favorite book has to be a Claire Tomlin biography.
Is there a favorite music score you have to write to?
Yes, I do actually. The Chopin cello concerto, because it makes me cry every time. It's the only piece of music Chopin wrote for the cello, and it's just visceral.
I can sympathize with that. Cello gets me every time. What's your favorite
Yeah.
food?
Favorite food?
Yes.
Well, I'm in Greece, so I'm going to pick a Greek salad.
I love that one
Fresh
too.
tomatoes and feta and a
I love
Greek
that one
salad.
too. And the final fave, what's your favorite travel destination?
Paris, I think.
Oh, beautiful. So that was it already. Thanks for listening and watching Everything All Right. My guest today was Anne Sebba, and we talked about her current book, Ethel Rosenberg, which is out in paperback now. Order it online, or better still, get it at your local independent bookstore. I am Ellen Alpsten. Subscribe and watch Everything All Right, and listen next week. Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank